I'm going to start by talking a bit about my childhood. Um, I was born in London. Um, my mum is from England and my dad is from Gambia, which is a small country in West Africa. And yeah, my parents separated when I was very young. Um, but up until the age of about 10, uh, my mum would take me over to Gambia once every couple of years or so, and we'd spend a couple of weeks there during the summer holidays. Um, and yeah, and I'd spend time there with extended family and things like that. And one thing that sort of stands out to me about that time is the feeling that I'd always have when I got back. Yeah, I'd get back from these trips to Gambia, and I'd just have this sense of sort of, I don't know, it's a kind of dread or kind of despair at the thought of going back to my sort of day-to-day routine. And it was strange in a way because you know, on the face of it, the life that I had was a fairly comfortable one, and I did have a lot to be grateful for. You know, my mum took really good care of me, and I had friends at school. You know, I went to sports clubs, and I sort of had everything that I sort of felt that I needed. But underneath that, there was this feeling that it was kind of all not quite enough. I couldn't exactly put my finger on what it was. Yeah, and the thought of going back to school just seemed like sort of bleak. Yeah, I remember feeling that quite intensely. And so my response to this was one day to basically go to my mum and say, I've thought about it, and I think we should relocate to Gambia permanently. I was probably only about, I don't know, 6 or 7 or something. I was very shy, but I was quite willful as a kid. She said no. And yeah, and after a while, this idea about moving to Gambia, it faded. But in a way, the feeling that had prompted that sort of urge didn't fade. And yeah, in a way, right through my childhood and my teenage years, there was always this kind of longing and this sense of wanting to get away, this sense that there was sort of like another world somewhere that I needed to find. And it expressed itself in lots of different ways. And it was kind of linked to whatever I was doing at the time. So I kind of watched a lot of like American TV and films as a kid. So a few years later, it kind of switched from moving to Gambia to moving to like California and living in like a Nickelodeon teenage comedy or something. And then later on, it was an online PC game called World of Warcraft, which I got obsessed with. Yeah, there's the 3 people in the room there. Yeah, and yeah, so there's this feeling, and yeah, my imagination would kind of get sort of sparked by something, and that feeling would kind of arise again. So yeah, fast forwarding a few years, and at the age of 18, I was, sorry. So at 18, I had got a place at uni to go and study English literature. And I was getting very excited because in a way it felt like, I don't know, it was sort of, you know, the first time I'd be sort of leaving the life that I'd had and had sort of been my normal life up until that point. And it felt like, you know, maybe on the other side of this big transition, I'd sort of find the thing that was finally going to bring me this sort of contentment that I was looking for. And yeah, I had decided to study English, and the reason for that was that a few years earlier, probably when I was about maybe, I don't know, 16 or 17, I sort of basically decided that I wanted to become a novelist. And yeah, I suppose by that point, reading, and especially fiction, had taken quite a sort of central role in position in my life. In a way, it was another escape, but I suppose it seemed to offer me something, I don't know, a little bit different to the other things, the other sort of things that I mentioned. And I think it sort of relates a little bit to what Amelie Odom was talking about earlier in the retreat, when he was talking about things that you can only understand from the inside. It's kind of hard to put my finger exactly on what it was that I experienced when I read books that I loved, but what I can say is that it sort of opened up experiences that I didn't quite have words for. What they did have is that it was sort of a bit like going through a portal into another way of being that was just clearly not like anything else in life, and it was something sort of deeply satisfying and also sort of suffused with this sense of kind of universal love and a kind of connection to humanity. And yeah, so I had a kind of little taste that was possible to feel. And it seemed like literature was sort of the avenue to sort of find more of that. And I suppose, you know, becoming a writer seemed like the best way of sort of creating a life where that feeling would be sort of at the centre. And you know, I sort of looked up to various writers who'd lived lives sort of centred around art. And to me, that seemed like the best way that I'd be able to sort of actually live this life of meaning that I'd always been looking for. So yeah, went off to uni, and I suppose there are a few things that sort of happened in that transition. One of them was, I suppose, a kind of a disillusionment in terms of what I was just talking about. I think quite quickly I kind of lost the sense of the sense that it was really possible to live the kind of life that I'd been hoping would sort of open up when I got there. Somehow the environment just didn't quite sort of stoke that inner inspiration. And it's like there were little glimmers of it here and there, and it would sort of come up every now and then, particularly in response to sort of certain writers. I remember whenever we'd read sort of the romantic poets like Wordsworth and Keats and writers like that, it's like a little bit of that sort of sense of wonder would sort of shine through, but it felt like it was a bit sort of crowded out by everything else that was going on. And also, I think when I saw the kind of lecturers, the sort of English faculty, in a way, they didn't quite live up to this sort of romantic ideal that I had of a sort of, this sort of romantic literary figure. I remember this one, I have this one memory of being on the campus. And there was this one lecturer in particular. He was a professor of poetry, and he was someone who I found particularly inspiring. And he'd give these very sort of emotionally charged lectures about his poetry that had inspired him. I remember he was somebody I was very drawn to. And I remember it's a bit ridiculous, but I was on the campus, and we had this sort of on-campus co-op, like a shop in co-op. And I remember just sort of standing sort of near the front of the shop and looking in and seeing this lecturer sort of standing in the queue in the co-op underneath this kind of, you know, the kind of like cold strip lighting that they have in shops, and he just looked like really sad. and I just sort of thought, I don't know, somehow it just felt like this sort of shining image that I'd had of a world where things would just be somehow different. Yeah, it just felt like I wasn't going to find it there. And yeah, the other thing that sort of was sort of unfolding at that point was this sense of loneliness, I suppose. I think a part of the sort of ideal that I'd had in my head was that I'd be around all these kind of sort of peers, these sort of other inspired people who I'd be able to sort of share my kind of love of art and things like that with. And I really found it quite hard to sort of find those people. So yeah, I felt very alone when I arrived at uni, and basically my response to that was just to sort of numb it. I mean, I'd started smoking weed probably a couple of years before that, but now I had a room to myself for the first time, and I had complete freedom. So, you know, I just sort of went for it. And yeah, before long, it just sort of became more and more of my sort of personality. And I guess what happened over the 3 years that I was there at uni is in a way, the kind of spark that I'd had, it just got sort of dimmer and dimmer, and my life just sort of got smaller and smaller. And I spent less and less of my time kind of in that imaginal sort of space, and more of my time just sort of numbing myself to life with weed, with video games, and things like that. And yeah, it got pretty bad. And in a way, it was like this sort of downward trajectory that yeah, didn't really have anything sort of pulling in the other direction. And yeah, it got so bad that a year after I'd graduated, I reached a point where yeah, I mean, I'd basically for a while been having these experiences where I'd sort of smoke some weed and then just have this really strange feeling of sort of emptiness afterwards. And I remember one day, I was 22 at the time, I'd been smoking heavily for a few days, and I remember waking up the next day and just having this experience like some sort of light had gone out or something. It was almost like a tap had been turned off, and it really just felt like all the kind of aliveness and the kind of zest for life and the kind of energy and the love in a way, it all just sort of dried up. And yeah, in a way, at first I didn't kind of know what was going on. It was quite a while before I started even thinking of it as depression. I think I'd imagined that depression would be like just sort of an extreme feeling of sadness, but this was something really different. And yeah, in a way, I was just stuck in that place for quite a long time, and I didn't really feel like I had a foothold to get myself out of it. I'm running out of time, so flashing forward a little bit to when I was 25, so about 5 years ago. I'd gone to the doctor, and he'd basically recommended that I try meditation. Yeah, so I downloaded Headspace, and I remember there was this one occasion that spring or summer where I was sitting in my local park near the house where I'd grown up, and I was meditating, and I had this experience where it was as if those feelings that I basically never thought I'd feel again just sort of kind of came back up. And I just felt like this aliveness that had been lost and that I genuinely thought was gone forever was just there, was just present, and it was like meditation. Suddenly was this sort of lifeline or this sort of thread that I'd be able to follow, and I did follow it. And a few years later, that led me to the LBC. And I'll just end by sort of saying something briefly about what it was like to find the LBC. Initially, it was just me watching Dharma talks on YouTube at home. For about 6 months before I ever came in person. But even that, just seeing the teachers and hearing what they had to say, there was a sense of an affirmation that kind of little spark of magic that I'd felt when I was a teenager and had kind of assumed was like this kind of peripheral element of life that wasn't really the center. It was kind of affirming that actually was the most important thing, which is, you know, from the inside what it had felt like as a teenager. But it was like the outside world had kind of convinced me that it was not really it, and that life was more about, you know, getting a job, being successful, reading the newspaper, being a good, you know, whatever. And it was like, here were these people who were kind of taking this sort of really unnamed kind of secret aspect of my experience and saying that is the center of life, and you can live your whole life sort of based on that. And finally, I mean, I remember in response to that thinking like I'm not looking for anything anymore. It was like, for the first time in my life, it was like there isn't anywhere else that I want to be. It was like, yeah, I found it basically. Thank you.